They saw an old man driving a rusted pickup with no plates. They laughed, mocked, made him sit on the curb under the blazing sun. They thought he was just another confused senior, or worse, a threat. But 1 hour later, a black government SUV pulled up. A four-star general stepped out, pointed at them and said, "You just stopped the man who trained me." From that moment on, everything changed. This is the story of Henry Brooks, a forgotten war hero, a man who never asked for recognition, but earned the respect of a nation. If you think honor never rusts, keep reading, because some legends walk quietly until the world finally notices. License, registration, or just a good excuse, old man. That was the sear from the young officer as he circled the rusted pickup, chuckling with his partner. The driver didn't argue, didn't even look up. He just kept both hands on the wheel, steady, silent, scarred. His name was Henry Brooks, 82 years old, wearing a faded flannel shirt, jeans, and a cap stitched with worn thread. U.S. Army Special Forces. To most, he looked like nobody, and that was exactly how he liked it. An hour later, a black SUV pulled up beside the cruiser. The back door opened. A four-star general stepped out. He didn't salute. He pointed at the officers and said 6 words. "You just stopped the man who trained me." That morning, Henry was heading home from the hardware store. His old Chevy rattled with every turn, but it ran because he had built it himself. He'd picked up a few boards and screws to repair a neighbor's wheelchair ramp. No charge. Never was. A mile from home, red and blue lights lit up his mirror. Henry calmly pulled over, hands still on the wheel. 2 young officers approached. One tapped the hood. No plates, no tags, driving a pile of junk. The other smirked. "Probably unregistered or stolen. What do you think, old man?" Henry replied softly without flinching. "It's mine. Since 1968. "Got ID?" He handed it over. They scoffed. "Retired, huh? Sure. Sit tight." They pulled him out. One laughed. "You sure you're not hauling moonshine in that thing?" Henry said nothing. Years of combat had taught him. Reacting only made things worse. Besides, he had nowhere urgent to be. They circled the truck, fingers tracing dents and rust. Each mark told a story, ones they couldn't begin to read. Afghanistan, Colombia, places that don't show up on official maps. "Step over here, sir," one said. The word "sir" soaked in mockery. Henry moved slowly, deliberate, controlled. "What's in the back?" The taller one pointed at the lumber and hardware. "Wheelchair ramp supplies for Mrs. Clancy. Down the street." The other officer laughed. "Sure it is." Henry's hands were thick with calluses, the kind earned from decades of building and rebuilding. Field hospitals under fire, shelters after hurricanes. And yes, ramps, dozens of them, for men who could no longer walk up their own porches. The sun was merciless as they ordered him to empty his pockets. Keys, wallet, a worn photograph, and a small notebook filled with names, some with stars, some crossed out. "What's this? Some kind of code?" "Names of men I served with," Henry said simply. The officer tossed the notebook aside without care. "Well, this truck's not road legal, that's for sure." Henry bent down, picked it up, and tucked it back into his shirt pocket, with the quiet reverence of a chaplain handling a folded flag. He didn't bother explaining the vehicle's historical designation, didn't mention the exemption papers filed every year. He just stood there, back straight, silent, unshaken. They made him sit on the curb. Cars passed, phones recorded. "He's being uncooperative," one officer said. "Might be a risk," the other added. They called it in. Possible stolen vehicle, elderly male, uncooperative tone. Henry stared out toward the horizon. In his pocket was a folded letter, a retirement note signed by the Army Chief of Staff. In the glove box, a Bronze Star certificate and a photo of the unit he once led. "It's just protocol," one officer said. "You understand, right?" Henry didn't answer. After 30 minutes, one of them kicked a tire and muttered, "Bet this guy thinks he's Rambo." A teenager walked by, snorted, and snapped a selfie. Henry, small and silent on the curb, appeared in the background. A punchline wrapped in sunlight and dust. The caption hit social media seconds later. Grandpa's in trouble. No questions asked. No thought given. Should we check his meds? The younger officer muttered. Maybe he forgot who he is. But Henry's silence wasn't confusion. It was discipline, the kind forged in darkness when silence meant survival. He'd once been interrogated by men who didn't wear badges and didn't care if he walked away alive. Compared to them, these two boys in blue were noise, static, harmless, if you knew how to wait. A few steps away, the old gas station clerk paused mid-step. He squinted at the man on the curb, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. He set down his coffee slowly, walked back inside, and picked up the phone. General Phillips, it's Mike, Riverside Gas. You're going to want to see this with your own eyes, sir. Time passed, slow as syrup in the heat. 40 minutes now. The officers leaned on the cruiser, coffee cups in hand, checking records, refreshing screens, finding nothing. One yawned, the other cracked a joke. Henry didn't move, didn't blink. The sun crawled higher and the asphalt shimmered. But he sat just as he had in the jungle once, motionless for 72 hours, mud in his ears, waiting for an extraction team that barely made it. Then came the low hum of tires. Heavy, intentional. A black SUV rolled in from the far end of the street. Government plates, windows tinted like obsidian. It pulled to a clean stop. The air shifted. The mood snapped taut. The back door opened. A man stepped out, tall, composed, in full four-star general uniform. No hesitation, no wasted motion. He looked at the two officers and said 6 words. Which of you stopped this man? Henry remained still. The officers had retreated into the shade by now, cooling off between record checks, waiting on nothing they could understand. A small crowd was beginning to gather, some curious, some recording. Most assumed Henry was just another old man who'd lost his way. They didn't notice his breathing, slow even. They didn't recognize the posture, upright, centered. They couldn't read the silence, the kind that comes after you've buried friends in places the world doesn't admit exist. Think we should call social services? The younger officer said it loud enough for Henry to hear. Nah, his partner shrugged. Probably has family somewhere. Once we verify the vehicle status, we'll figure it out. Henry's thoughts drifted to similar roads. Dusty paths in Vietnam, where young men with rifles and little training had stopped him. Those encounters had ended differently. Back then, respect was the line between life and death. Just then, a woman stepped forward from the sidewalk, heading toward the officers. Excuse me, that's Henry Brooks. The woman stepped forward, voice firm. He builds ramps for disabled veterans in our community. Ma'am, please step back. This is police business, one officer replied, dismissive. But he's a decorated veteran. Everyone around here knows him. We're just doing our job, ma'am. Please return to your vehicle. She walked away, shaking her head. Henry's knees ached from sitting on the concrete, but he wouldn't show it. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him uncomfortable. He'd endured far worse. Tropical diseases, shrapnel wounds, 36 hours in a flooded cave during monsoon season. At the gas station nearby, Tom Hensley, former Army himself, had recognized Henry immediately. Tom had seen Henry at VFW meetings, where he rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. Tom knew exactly who to call. General Parker, it's Tom from Riverside Gas. Sir, they've got Henry Brooks sitting on the curb like a criminal. Yes, sir. Corner of Maple and Pine. Yes, sir, that Henry Brooks. The officers, growing bored with their catch, reviewed the computer results. No warrants, no alerts. The vehicle wasn't stolen, just old and unregistered. Let's wrap this up, the senior officer muttered. Write him up for expired registration, improper plates, and an unsafe vehicle. 3 tickets, nearly $1,000 in fines. Rules are rules. They approached Henry with clipboards in hand, ready to deliver their bureaucratic punishment, when the unmistakable rumble of heavy tires on asphalt made everyone look up. The black SUV didn't roll in cautiously. It arrived with purpose. Government plates, military driver. The officers exchanged glances. Federal, one whispered. FBI, maybe? Neither guessed right. Silence. One officer stammered, we were just... The general raised a hand. That man, Henry Brooks, taught me how to lead. Sir, at Fort Bragg, 1983, he ran recon, saved my entire squad during a training mission when we lost signal in the swamp. The general's aide stepped forward, holding a leather portfolio embossed with the presidential seal. He stood at perfect attention beside his superior. The crowd, now growing, had been drawn by the sudden arrival of military brass. Phones were raised. Everything was being recorded. A retired mail carrier whispered to his wife, "That's why I always left extra stamps for Mr. Brooks." One officer blinked. "We didn't know." "You didn't ask," the general replied. He walked up to Henry. "Permission to help you up, Sergeant Major." Henry stood without assistance. "Permission granted." The cameras recorded in reverent silence. The general turned to the officers. "You just disrespected a man with 3 combat tours in 40 years of service. This truck, it's part of Army history. So is he." Then facing the crowd, "This is what happens when we stop teaching respect." A young girl tugged her mother's sleeve. "Is he famous?" Her mother smiled softly. "No, honey, he's more than that. He's real." One of the officers slowly removed his sunglasses. "Sir, we're sorry." Henry simply said, "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the next old man before you assume he's nothing." The general saluted him. Henry returned it. General Parker stood ramrod straight, his 4 stars gleaming in the sunlight. The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the children could sense the gravity of the moment. Then the general's voice rang out. Sergeant Major Brooks led the operation that extracted 23 hostages from the Colombian jungle in 1986. He returned to active duty at age 60 after 9/11 to train in special operations and advanced survival techniques. 3 presidents have shaken his hand. His mission records remain classified until 2075. The techniques he developed for high-altitude rescues saved 18 airmen during a mission I'm still not at liberty to name. A woman in nurse's scrubs stepped to the edge of the crowd. "Mr. Brooks donated blood every month for 30 years, she said. Never missed a single appointment." The officers shifted awkwardly, uncomfortable now, unsure where to look. The general turned toward the rusted Chevy. "The truck you mocked? It transported medical supplies during Hurricane Andrew in '92. Henry drove it through 4 feet of floodwater to reach stranded families." The older officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we were just following protocol for vehicles without..." The general cut him off, voice sharp. "Protocol is built on judgment, officer. And Henry Brooks wrote the protocol for night extractions, still used by our forces to this day." Henry stood expressionless, his weathered face unreadable. But those who knew him recognized the slight lift of his shoulders, his quiet version of pride. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. "That's the man who built my husband's wheelchair ramp after his stroke," she announced. "Wouldn't take a dime for it." Another voice called out, "He taught my son's scout troop wilderness survival last summer. He delivers groceries to the senior center every Wednesday," added an elderly man with a cane. General Parker nodded, unsurprised. "Sergeant Major Brooks never stopped serving, did he?" The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, many filming, the moment already going viral. 4-star general defends elderly vet harassed by police. The younger officer, face flushed with shame, stepped toward Henry. "Sir, I want to apologize personally. I had no idea." Henry interrupted gently. "That's the point, son. You never know who someone is just by looking at them. That's why respect comes first, not last." The general produced a file from his aide and handed it to the senior officer. "This is Sergeant Major Brooks's service record, the unclassified version. I suggest you both read it before your shift ends today." The officer accepted it with a chastened nod. "As for the truck," General Parker continued, "it has historical vehicle status granted by the Department of Defense. The paperwork is filed annually with your department. Next time, check the records more thoroughly." Then at last, Henry spoke again. His voice was quiet, but steady. "General, these officers were doing their job as they understood it. The fault isn't entirely theirs." "Explain, Sergeant Major." Henry turned to the crowd. We've created a system where badges and uniforms matter more than the people wearing them. Where protocols replace judgment, Henry said quietly. I saw the same mistake in Vietnam. Young men following orders, without context. The general nodded slowly. Always the teacher, aren't you, Henry? For the first time, Henry smiled, just slightly. Until they put me in the ground, sir. That afternoon, the sheriff's department released a public statement. The incident made national news. Legendary veteran detained, General defends former mentor. The town's mayor declared June 4th as Henry Brooks Day. Donations poured in from across the country, 247,000 within the first week. Henry directed every penny toward building wheelchair ramps for disabled veterans across the nation. The Henry Brooks Initiative was born, launching with a wait list of over 300 homes needing accessibility modifications. Today, a bronze plaque stands on the street corner where Henry was once stopped. It reads, "Not every uniform comes with a spotlight, but every act of service leaves a legacy." Henry kept driving that same old truck. Its engine still rattled like loose change in a tin can, but it ran, stubborn and steady, just like its owner. He still built ramps, still showed up unannounced at homes with his toolbox and quiet smile, still refused to take a dime, but something had changed. Now, when people saw him driving down Main Street, they didn't look through him anymore. They stepped aside. Hats came off, hands lifted to wave, and sometimes, when the timing was just right, they saluted. A few weeks after the incident, one of the officers showed up at Henry's porch, not in uniform, just a young man in a plain shirt, holding his cap in his hands. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, voice low. Truly. Henry didn't speak right away. He simply stepped aside, motioning toward a second chair. A pot of coffee sat between them, already brewing. They sat in silence for a long while until Henry poured 2 mugs and slid one across the table. "You learn from it," he said quietly, "or someone else pays next time." That moment stayed with the young officer, Brandon Keene, for the rest of his life. From that day forward, Brandon made it a rule. Every new rookie in the department had to read Henry's file before their first patrol shift. Not because it was procedure, but because it was right. And slowly, the ripple widened. The video had exploded. Over 8 million views within days. Veterans groups across the country began sharing their own stories of silent service and quieter disrespect. The hashtag trended for weeks. Hashtag know who you stop. As for Henry, he continued to avoid the spotlight. He never gave interviews, turned down every invitation to appear on national TV. But that summer, he quietly finished his 23rd wheelchair ramp. This one for a Gulf War veteran who hadn't left his porch in 2 years. And Brandon? He didn't just apologize and disappear. He started showing up every Saturday at the VFW Hall. At first, the old veterans eyed him with suspicion. To them, he was still the kid who disrespected Henry Brooks. But week by week, plank by plank, he kept showing up. He fixed roofs, repaired heating units, drove veterans to appointments. He didn't ask for praise, and Henry never said, "I forgive you." He didn't have to. Instead, one Saturday evening, as they were patching a leaking roof under the amber light of a setting sun, Henry asked, "Why did you really come back?" Brandon paused, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked up. "Because I realized," he said, "I knew nothing about the people I swore to protect. 4 years on the force, and I never once walked through the door of this place." Months later, the sheriff's department launched a new training program, Recognition and Respect, Veterans in Our Community. And Henry, after some convincing, agreed to speak at the first session. He stood in front of a room full of young recruits, hands clasped behind his back, voice steady, no microphone, no slideshow, just 11 words. Service doesn't end with the uniform, neither should the respect for it. The room fell silent. No one checked their phones, no one whispered, because in that moment, they knew exactly who they were listening to. 3 months later, General Parker returned. No entourage, no ceremony, no stars on his shoulders. He sat beside Henry on the porch of his modest home, 2 old soldiers in worn-out chairs watching fireflies flicker in the twilight, a bottle of good whiskey between them. No words for a while, just the sound of crickets, the creak of old wood. Finally, the general spoke. You turned it around, Henry, like always. Henry shook his head. No, he said. They turned it around themselves. All they needed was a mirror. The truck still rattles down Main Street every morning, still carries lumber, still hauls tools, and sometimes it carries something heavier, a flag-draped coffin. When a veteran passes without family, Henry drives them to rest, because no soldier should take their last ride alone. Now, when that truck appears on the road, police cruisers pull over, not to stop it, to salute it. And at the local police academy, every recruit on their first day is handed a small laminated card with 6 simple words. You never know who you're stopping. Subscribe to New Day Story. If you believe true honor doesn't rust,